As someone about to enter the job market, do you think it's fair to increase government spending, like so many of you plan to do, when my generation will be left to pay off the debt?
Right, you have the question and you have a minute each to start with before we debate it. Nicola Sturgeon, would you start?
Well, I believe it's really important to get the deficit and the debt down. But I also believe that economic policy is not an end in itself. It's a means to allow people to live healthier, happier and more prosperous lives. And if that policy, the policy of austerity, is driving more people into poverty, including more children, if it's undermining our public services, and if it's actually holding back economic growth, then I think it's time to change that policy. That's why the SNP is proposing an alternative, modest spending increases in the next Parliament that would still see the debt and the deficit reduce every year. Yes, it would take a couple of years longer to completely eliminate the deficit, but I think that is a price worth paying for enabling us to invest in infrastructure, in innovation, in skills, in the things that allow us to get our economy growing, to invest in our public services like the National Health Service, and to have real action to lift people out of poverty. That's why I am proud to argue that alternative in this election.
Ed Miliband?
Charlotte, you're right. We've got to live within our means as a country. And that's why under my plan we'll cut the deficit every year and we'll balance the books. But we'll do it a different way from David Cameron. And I reject his plan to double the spending cuts next year, because I think for you and so many people in this audience who rely on our NHS, that would be a disaster. So here's our plan. Our plan is to have fair taxes, to reverse David Cameron's tax cut for millionaires, which has given every millionaire in Britain £43,000 a year. It's to clamp down on that tax avoidance and raise £7.5 billion a year. It's to protect education and health, but outside some key areas like that, to see spending fall. And it's also about something else. Because by raising living standards of working people in this country, we can get more tax revenues in and we can get the deficit down. It's a fair plan. It's a better plan from David Cameron's carrying on as he is.
Okay, Natalie, your turn.
Well, Charlotte, I'm greatly concerned about the debt that your generation faces. But that debt, for about the 50% who go to university, is tuition fee debt, which we want to reduce to zero and pay off the student loans. Students are leaving with £44,000 worth of debt on average. 73% of them will never pay it off. And of course, you're going out into a workplace where 1 in 5 workers is on less than a living wage. People aren't paid enough money to live on. They're indeed stacking up debts just to meet their basic costs. The cost of housing is enormous, and that's why we do want to deal with the debt and the deficit, and we reduce it to about 1% of GDP from 5% of GDP in our manifesto now. But if we invest some of that money in building a social home, a home that you might be able to live in and a genuinely affordable rent, if we invest that in renewable energy, in providing warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes, then you are much better off. We've invested in your future, in your entire generation's future.
Nigel Farage.
Well, Charlotte, you're quite right. And what nobody wants to talk about, and it's a great shame that David Cameron is not here, is that in the last 5 years our national debt has doubled from £850 billion to £1.5 trillion. The interest repayments on that are already bigger than our current level of defence spending, and that's with interest rates at rock bottom on the floor. So you're right, it is not fair because we are burdening future generations. All I can say is, listening to the promises that I've heard from the people here tonight and the other two who went somewhere else this evening, is they are going to drive us into even greater debt, frankly bankruptcy for your generation. UKIP is the only party to come up with a credible plan by cutting our foreign aid budget, by cutting our EU contributions, by stopping white elephant projects like HS2, and by recalculating the Barnett formula so that less money goes over Hadrian's Wall to Scotland. We can save £32 billion a year. And if you ally that to tax cuts and growth, UKIP is the only party with a plan to get this debt down.
Leanne Wood.
Plaid Cymru does want to tackle the deficit, but not at any cost and not according to artificial deadlines. We want to invest in the future generation and we want to invest in job creation. Our welfare state was hard fought for, and remember that investment was put into building that welfare state in the 1940s when there was no money in the coffers, when the country's debt was massive. But that time delivered public services for all, and remember it also delivered a generation in the 1950s that were told that they'd never had it so good. So continuing on the path of austerity will deliver a very uncertain future for the next generations. Investing in job creation and public services now will offer them a much better future.
Okay, thank you.